So you've come back from your photography trip downtown, and now we're going to work with Lightroom and your Lightroom catalog so that you can do some editing with your photos. So just a quick reminder, open your Lightroom catalog, but make sure you go to your hard drive and find your Lightroom folder and double-click your catalog. You want to be in your catalog, otherwise you could be in someone else's. Make sure you have your SD card plugged into your computer and your hard drive, of course. And once you have both, you can go ahead and import. I've set up with SD card that I took a few photos on, so we'll see what I came up with. This is my SD card, Leica DSC, and my photos were stored right in here. I've used this same card for quite a bit. So I'm definitely not going to import all my photos, but I am going to see if it'll just recognize my new photos. And it looks like there's quite a bit that I've messed with. So I'm going to go ahead and select the photos that I'm importing. And I won't take the time to import everything, but I'll pick a few interesting photos. You guys, however, would do well to pick everything you've got, okay? Let's pick this one, that one, and this chair, and that church, and this one, and we'll call it good. So make sure when you import that you know where your stuff is going, and mine goes to my hard drive. Mine is called Gold. You have named yours. And hopefully you have a folder in here that says photos. If you don't, just follow my directions in the previous video. Click here to create a new folder, type photos, and they'll go in. My folder system is a little different. I just use dates. So I'm going to go ahead and import these. They're going to go right into a folder for September 11th in my hard drive. Make sure they don't go on Macintosh HD. So let me just click import. I can see my progress right up here. I am importing just a few photos, enough to play with today, and it should be pretty quick. All right, so it looks like they are in. And now what I want to do and what I want you to do is I want you to get in the habit of starting off by rating your photos. So it's a scale of 1 through 5. And you can just click the photo and then you can type a number. So I clicked this photo, I typed 5. I don't think this is a 5. I'm going to make this a 3. This I want to mess with. I'm going to make that a 5. Oh, that looks like a 3. This is interesting. I'll make that a 4. This I have some plans for. I'm going to make that a 5. This one, I like the layout. This one we're going to rotate later. I'll make that a 5. And these two I took at the very end of the day, and I'm not going to be picky. I'm going to make those both 5s. Why bother rating? Well, your rated photos will show up later in your collections, and we'll talk about that a little later on. It's a great way to organize your photos. All right, so I spent a little bit of time. I rated my photos. You saw that as I typed or as I entered a number, if I make this a 4, it automatically goes to the next photo. Okay, so it makes it very easy to go through and rate your photos. Now, one thing you can do once you rate your photos is make a collection of just your 5s. So I'm going to show you that as well so that we can make this easy. So you can go up to Library and you can go to New Smart Collection. And you can give it a name, and I'm going to call this 5 stars. And you can set, this is the rating. So any rating that is greater or equal to 5 stars is going to go in that collection. Okay, so now you'll see that every 5-star photo I've ever rated is in this new collection right here. And I can be pretty much anywhere in my Lightroom catalog. I can be just looking at these, And I can say, you know what? I rated some of these 5. I want to see how they measure up against all my 5-star ratings. And I can come down here and I can find my collections and I can just click 5 stars. And I can look at all my 5-star photos and maybe I can go through them and I can come up with other decisions. Okay? I definitely need to go through some of my 5 stars here. So I'm going to go back to my previous import and I just scrolled up on this side toolbar. I'm going to look at all my photos for a minute and we're going to do a little bit of developing. So once you take a picture, you know, it's just like old school darkroom where you've made a picture and now you need to come in and do a little bit with that. So this is the picture I'm going to work with. I just highlight it and I go to the develop mode. Now, this is the picture I made, and it tells me a few things. This is the histogram, and the histogram tells me color levels for all the colors. It also tells me light levels and what is white, what is here as pure white, bright, and what is here as real, true, absolute black. And you'll see that in this photo, while the wall is whitish and the sign is whitish, there's very little here that is absolutely has hit the peak, okay, that has hit the top level of whites. You'll see that on photos where there's a lot of bright going on. Here, this photo's a back alley, then there's not a lot. You will see there are some blacks, some true black, maybe down in here in these legs. It doesn't even look like that's true black. So when you push auto on the develop mode right here, it's going to try to give you a true black and a true white and balance everything in between. The histogram tells you the full scope of everything. It tells you blacks, where the shadows are and how dark or light those shadows are, the overall exposure of the image, and the highlights, which I'm calling the whites, okay? The highlights are the bright areas. So this is something you need to watch, because if you're working on your computer and your screen is kind of dark, as I just made mine, well, you can look at this photo and say, oh my gosh, my photo's very dark. I really need to brighten everything up quite a great deal. When actually maybe you don't need to brighten it as much. Maybe it's a screen issue. So that's why we look here and make our measurements here. Okay, I'm going to get my screen back to a decent work level. And you'll see also that as I change or brighten my screen, it doesn't affect this. All right, it's not affecting the photo. It's just affecting how I'm seeing this photo. So let's go ahead and start. Now, this is the panel I use for adjusting exposure. And I can start by adjusting white balance. White balance is a setting in your camera that tells the camera, hey, we're going to call this white, or maybe white is this. And that designation, the way light reflects off that white surface, determines the color level of every other thing in the photo. So this is the white balance as it was shot. This is on auto, which is, you can see a little different, a little yellower. White balance, we use these two terms. We use the word warm for a more yellow golden hue to the photo. And we use, so this is definitely warmer. And we use cool for a bluer temperature. All right? So right now I've changed this around. I'm going to actually find the white balance from this, and I'm going to use this little eyedropper, and I'm going to click what I think is going to be a neutral target, and I think it's right back here. So when I click that, Adobe Lightroom is telling me, here's what we think it really looked like that day, not quite what you shot. If you go back to as I shot it, and as I shot it, it's kind of a gray, a little bluish hue, but the custom setting I just made is definitely warmer. This wood looks a lot better than it did as I shot it. It looks a little more natural. These chairs look a little better. And let's look at the whites right back here when I go back to custom. When I go to custom, it kind of looks a little warmer. So we'll use that word. So the first thing that I do is I adjust the white balance. Now, one thing I want to check is I want to check and see what Lightroom would do with auto. And this is the number that I came up with, 7650. We'll talk about that a little more. But here's what auto does. Auto did just about the same thing as my pick. So I'm going to go back to my custom pick here. Okay? Now, I can click auto and see what Lightroom does with this. And I'm actually going to do that. That's how I often start with my photos, is I start off with auto, I see what Lightroom's going to do, and then I make decisions based on there. So here's auto. And Lightroom didn't do too much. It made the blacks a little stronger. You'll see it down in here. It adjusted some of the overall exposure. It looks like it brought the highlights way down. We're going to talk about all those. The shadows, these kind of middle areas right down here, it raised those up. Let's see what happens when we bring that back down to 0. See how down here we've gotten a lot darker. We'll bring it to 0. And see how this is kind of like a darkish dirty. But when I'm just going to hit Command Z 3 times. When we bring it up to plus 48, it kind of gives you more detail down here. It brought the whites up by 14 points. And I'm just going to double click it to bring it back to 0. And that's at 0. And let's see what happens when I raise it to 14, right about there. You'll see, if you're watching the histogram as well, that I'm also moving that overall shift. At 0, my whites are kind of grayish. They're not like super white. But at 14, they move it over, things pop a little bit better. They look a little more white across the board. Finally, the level of blacks. Adobe brought the blacks down, and it gave us really more of true black, and it gave us a little better range. Here's minus 16. If we went down farther, we start to get into the shadows and start to make that a little darker. And I'm going to double click it. If we go to 0, it kind of is like there's not really a true black in this picture. So I'm going to hit Command Z twice and got back to minus 16. Overall, I'm pretty happy with what Adobe just did with this. I picked a new white balance, and I let Adobe make most of the calls here. You see it also brought up the contrast, plus 6. If I bring the contrast down, double click to 0 to plus 6, it doesn't do a whole lot. It does increase the range a little bit. Look at, if we bring it way up, it almost gets kind of like it flattens things. It sort of makes everything kind of dark. So I think I'm going to go with Adobe's call on that, and I'm going to make that be plus 6. All right, so that's the basics. And doing that with your photos gives you what is generally seen as a pretty solid exposure. Sometimes you'll click auto on a photo, and you're not going to be too happy with it. Well, the first thing to do is start playing with these sliders and start from the top down. Start looking at exposure and see if Adobe got that right, or maybe the image needs to be a little brighter or a little darker. All right? Exposure touches everything in the photo. But down here, once you get into contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, you can start to play with the individual pieces of the photo. Okay, presence. Presence is pretty new, and it's not seen as generally a basic adjustment. So I'm going to deal with this in a separate tutorial. But I'd like you to start just by focusing on the beginning part of getting these photos edited. Okay? Oh, one more thing. If you do something like this and you kind of want to see what it used to look like, well, you can just click reset. It'll clear everything back to normal. Previous kind of wiped us out there. But the other thing you can do once you've clicked auto is, and you'll see that I also lost my my new white balance, so I'll get that again. If you do click auto and you want to see what it looked like without quite wiping everything, just double click tone, and tone will take you back to the way it was. So again, I started with white balance. I picked a white balance. It's a very neutral area, no detail, nothing like that. And I clicked auto, and then I made a few more adjustments with that till I got something I was pretty happy with. So start playing with your photos, and let's see where you make out.